Hey mates, it's me Riz doing reaction on the channel again. This is The Death of the Arcade by Play Value, and this is a over a 10-year-old video, and yeah, the death of arcade. I'm saying the death of arcades. It sounds a lot better, but I'm probably gonna say that than the death of the arcade. So arcades now are kinda, in Australia at least, they are kinda still around, though it's sort of, at one point it's sort of like nostalgic, but then there are some that are trying to be more ambitious. Though it's kind of hard to tell when arcades just released on what year, but there are some that are still around that they do stuff that you couldn't do at home. The ones I think of is those car racing ones with their own wheel and seat. Just to play a lot of one card game that was made by Sega. I can't remember what it was. NASCAR, no, something. But the problem, the thing I know that arcades kind of died out was of it really was just to eat people's money. It just eat the quarters, 50 cents or dollar. I think it credits for one credit. A lot of them were around a dollar. I think it was a dollar or two. $1 for one play, $2 for three plays. I believe, and it's the same setting. It's the same principle as the pinball machines. They were they were there just to eat money, and the only goal is to get the high score. And some incorporated story, and then after that they have to do it all over again just to get that high score. And then about around mid of the Super Nintendo era, um, they started to realize that story was very important. I mean, that's when the big jump came that you must have more focus on story. Though that can be said for the first NES, but there wasn't a clear thought of the difference that do we need the high score, or could we just make a game that has more story and story, make it more like a movie? And you start to see that over through each generation. They put more focus on doing story rather than high score, but though in somewhere in all that story they kind of miss about on the fun of the game and just became tedious. But anyway, let's go.
Value is brought to you by Xbox Live Marketplace.
You could just purchase if you have an Xbox Live account, you could purchase Crackdown and Crackdown 2 for free. I believe they're still free. And also another game, Something Human, Too Human. Not a good game. But two Crackdown games are on Xbox Live and you could download them for free. And despite having those games already, it's just nice to have them on the hard drive.
When you talk about arcade games, you have such awesome memories of either going with your friends or just
Yeah.
that's what kept your attention for hours and hours and hours and hours when you were a kid.
Family. Family, some parties. The biggest arcade bit I was is damn, I don't know the name of it, but it was a bowling. Essentially, it was a bowling alley. Um, you know, you go there, do bowling. There's also a bar, of course there is. Welcome to Australia. And also they make. I think maybe they do some food and such. Then there's the maybe now we could just call it some sort of retro arcade gallery kind of thing. But it's been around there for since the 90s, I believe. Though I think it was more spread out in the bowling area, but then they just put all the machines into one room and had lot of lights, neon lights, and then yeah, that's what you do to play some arcades and even some games that they don't have video games. There was sort of like stuff like a whack-a-mole kind of one. There was even one where it was a step version on stepping spiders. Actually, that's very fitting.
Did.
Arcades were great and they were a fad for a while, but looking back now, it's if you look at one, it's almost like looking at like a malt shop in the 50s. It's just not a thing we have anymore.
You know, so in the early 70s, Pong was actually a hit in bars, right? But it was
Yeah.
toward the end of the 70s that games like Space Invaders came out, these huge moneymakers.
Oh, there's a story I gotta tell you, is that there was one story that a Pong machine wasn't working somewhere in America. Somewhere in America there was a Pong machine that stopped working. The manager or barman just called up the technician to check what was wrong with the Pong machine, and what was wrong with it was that there were too many quarters in the machine, and it stopped working because it couldn't take any more quarters. So they had to empty out this giant bag of quarters, and I'd say that the man just like was, or whoever was making money off of that was just very, very happy, and then they just fixed it up, and yeah, they had to, no problem. It's just funny that how arcades, even that then, was very popular. Pong was that popular to do that, but I'm not sure if other arcades ever had that situation. Feel free to put something like a story like that in the comments. Come on, put some memories down in the comments.
Actually established a reason to have dedicated arcades.
And here you have dedicated gaming centers for people to say, let's put a center for kids to play games.
Yeah.
And the games will come. And sure enough, hot on the heels, Pac-Man was at the height.
So Pac-Man, in a lot of ways, is the first video game character. Before
This
that,
is what my
there's just a
mom
lot
was
of
playing.
spaceships, a lot of boxes and triangles, bleeping and
I don't know if you play
blooping.
arcade
Pac-Man's
or
kind of like
just
a
on Game
person.
Boy or something.
And you know, you can put him in a Saturday morning cartoon, you can put him on the cover of Time,
What?
you can put him on kids'
was Pac-Man
lunchboxes.
on Game Boy?
He has a wife.
That time period between,
I can't
you know,
remember.
say
The
1978
Space Invaders
and
was
maybe
on Game Boy.
82, 83 was sort of the golden age of arcades. Every year you had new games that were pushing the technology, making a heck of a lot more money.
You got Donkey Kong, you got your pole position, you got your Frogger.
You know, you had the Star Wars arcade
Seinfeld
game,
episode
which was
with
huge.
Frogger, with George
Centipede.
Costanza.
They all used different control mechanisms. So some were joysticks, some were paddles, others used a trackball.
Video games eventually became so mainstream that there's a movie based on video games, Tron. And then in turn, of course, there's a video game Tron based on the movie.
So by
What?
the early
Oh,
80s, you've got about 1.5 million arcade
Wait,
machines in the
Tron
country.
was based
Together,
on Tron the arcade.
people are playing about 2 million hours a year on these machines. That's a lot of time for people to spend going bump, 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 like that.
I mean, we all just pulled together. Someone had to stop the centipede invasion. Had to be us.
Oh, was those cases? Oh, I remember. There were, if I remember, they also they just some were huddled around to this one arcade machine. I can't remember what it was, but everyone was just pulling money together on putting quarters just to get through the end of an arcade game. I think it was like a fighting game, though I don't know what it was. I'm gonna say I can't remember. Jeez, maybe it was the Simpsons arcade. I remember that because it was on some. You know, arcades were kind of like on a side. It was like the side, like a few arcades on the side of a lot of businesses that kind of had more towards kids and such. But gee. All I remember is just that I was playing something else. I think it was playing some pinball game. Anyway, continue.
The video game industry in that period from the late 70s to the early 80s was out of control. It was pulling in $20 billion a year, which was more
Back
than
up.
from the late 70s to the early 80s was out of control. It was pulling in $20 billion a year, which was more than
Jeez.
Major League Baseball, football, and basketball were pulling
Wow.
combined. This is ridiculous. Probably explains why Americans are pretty fat.
Now this was a big
Okay, wait. Is play value what kind? Who? Where's play value recorded in? Is it in America or why Americans are fat? There are many things to say that Americans are fat. Most of it involving the quantity of how much food there is, just cheap, how much cheap food there is. When I once, there are times been to America before, and I was just dumbfounded on how much just what was once a dollar is something like $1. It's what's a good analogy for it? Just anything that was normal that you purchased in Australia, it was just large, just the size that you didn't. Just the size that you didn't. Fuck, I'm terrible at giving an analogy for this. Shit, I can't think of an analogy right now. Also, oh wait, I remember there is something with the arcades. Remember when I went on holiday for San Francisco? We were mostly there for the Alcatraz tour. There was also somewhere at the docks a museum of arcades, and they had the original Pong arcade machine, but a bunch of carnival games and a bunch of stuff that you see with ice hockey, or the weird ice hockey, Succum robots, like the original ones that were all metal. Like it was like a not super extravagant, though. Depending on who you ask, it was pretty big. It was much bigger than anything I've seen in Australia, considering. But anyway, continue.
But we knew it couldn't last forever.
Every year, the video game industry was just growing, and it was growing in terms of the money it was bringing in terms of the number of people who were actually visiting arcades. People involved in the industry really didn't think there was anywhere for it to go but up. And
Yep.
it actually ended up peaking and not growing any further because the investment started to exceed how many people were actually going to play the games.
When arcades started to fall, the first people to feel it were places that should never have had games in the first place. Places like grocery markets, restaurants, senior citizen homes, synagogues. Those all disappeared. After that, the huge theme parks built around the idea that video games were just a never-ending growth business. Those started to fall. By the end, the only places left are in the middle, the medium-sized arcades. Little dark, not as glamorous, but just reasonable enough to turn profit.
And then around 86, 87, the Nintendo had come out and became really popular, and that revitalized the entire game industry, but it moved the focus back into the living room.
Arcade games, because it was such a business made up of 100 companies, they wouldn't advertise on TV. Whereas Nintendo, they're like, Mom, buy your son this. Buy your son this. And the son, they're like, tell Mom to buy me this. Birthdays, Christmas, you can't give an arcade game, realistically. You can give a Nintendo.
So actually, the Nintendo system and arcades, could actually kind of peacefully coexist. The nail in the coffin for arcade games is when
Sega
the Sega
was
Genesis
great
came out
at
in like
porting
89,
arcade
90,
games.
Because, it was arcade games that you could play at home. It was direct competition.
Now, Sega was making arcade games, but they decided to make the same versions of the games for their new home console. Now, why did they do that? It's not because they didn't want to make money in arcades anymore, but they said, we can do better if we start selling these games directly to the consumer. You don't have to go to Joe Bob's Pizza Shack anymore. We can just say, hey, Mr. Consumer, watch this commercial on TV and go out and buy this game yourself. So Sega was cannibalizing their own arcade audience, but they had seen the writing on the wall. They knew that home gaming was the wave of the future.
They were able to replicate the arcade experience pretty well. So first and foremost, the fact that you could get Strider, Altered Beast, Afterburner on your home systems when you bought your Genesis eliminated the need to go to the arcade. But then the other thing that started happening is that being able to play these games at home, people started to ask for longer, more involved video game experiences than they had previously had.
Arcade games are designed to kill you.
Yeah.
They're designed to be frustrating.
Just
if you
like
just sit there and
pinball
play it
machines.
forever, it would not be a profitable business. Whereas the home games work with you a little more. They're a little more fun. You can do things like explore, you can tell a story.
Like the levels onto which you were stimulated were just completely changed, and they were more involved. You were actually becoming the character, and you had to think about where to go and what to collect and what to do and where to find things.
The real case in point for this is Neo Geo. This is a system that was designed to be as good at home as it is in the arcade. The games were the same in both. And even though the price point was abnormally high, the games were just very boring, and they weren't the kind of games people wanted.
Why do I want to spend, and in this case, $54 for a game that gives me 3-minute bursts of fun? Nobody wants that. They want something deeper.
You know, gamers grew up and they wanted more variety, and you know, the home console offered that. They had horror games, you know, adventure games, role-playing games, sports games. I mean, how do you play a sports game in an arcade? It's like impossible.
So when you go home, you
be
have this
surprised.
rich tapestry of genres you can play with, and that's why arcades died. They're a very narrow set of fleeting experiences, and you know, we just outgrew them.
What was interesting is that when you're in the arcade, you're basically putting in quarters and you're trying to last as long as you can with a limited amount of money. And there's a real financial incentive when you get Final Fight at home and you can just continue and play till you beat it. It totally sucks any fun, and you realize right away that those games suck.
The dead cat bounce of arcades, right when they bounce, right before the final death cry, is Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat.
These games are going to test your skill against complete strangers, people you don't know. And you know, you get bragging rights, and people are always
Yeah.
stepping up to the challenge, trying to challenge them.
That's something that's very important in the development of video games. It never really went away. It's just now we do it online. And there's elaborate ranking systems, so you know exactly
my
how good the
goodness.
person you're playing is versus how good you are.
My goodness,
So
I didn't go
the
through
last thing that the
online
arcades had to hold
shit.
on to was that social interaction and that competitiveness against strangers. Well, you know what? That even fizzled as soon as the internet came along.
I think there will always be arcade games around though, just like for nostalgic purposes.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, I don't want to get rid of that Frogger game that's been sitting in the back of the store because it's been part of history. You know, it's like, it's sad, but it happened.
So we grew up, and the games grew up, but the arcades, well, they couldn't grow up, and they couldn't change, so they died. But they died for us. They died so we could have Oblivion and World of Warcraft and really complex artistic games like that.
Arcades had to die for the art to evolve. You know, you can't make an omelet without destroying a few businesses. That's the bottom line.
Wait, is that?
Rated.
Why does that sound like the mantra of EA? You can't. Let's see that. Do that once again.
Evolve. You know, you can't make an omelet without destroying a few businesses.
That is EA. That's EA. They destroyed so many businesses just so they could still fucking keep making money and then keep laying off more shit. That man. Okay, well, on the one hand, it is a bit of a shame for arcades. They just died, but they're kind of still around, though not regularly. Though it is, I'm not having that much of a shame about it. But if there was some way for people to mod some of these arcade machines to become much more fun, there may be a way to actually, you know what? When they did all the ports for mini arcade, when you can get all these arcades ported onto maybe those plug and play games or just on the console market or PC market. I mean, heck, I even have I think I remember. I think I have a some sort of free trial of Pac-Man on Xbox, and you know I was only would play it for maybe just a few minutes, and that's it. They only have 3 minutes. Just like I said, it's a 3-minute burst of play enjoyment. But yeah. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. Please like and subscribe. It brings a smile to my face. Next video on play value is the fall of Atari. Oh, this is gonna be fun.